Hi, my name is Justin, aka Ghost Reader, and today I am going to be talking about The Hobbit. So this month I am doing Octolkien with Steve Donahue and James Chatham, and we'll be reading works by J.R. Tolkien during the month of October. I will be reading, or have actually I've read The Hobbit, and I'll be reading The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King this month. Warning that there will be slight spoilers in this video, but nothing too big. But if you haven't read the Lord of the Rings, and you want to read it with the Hobbit. If you want to read the Hobbit, um, and you want to read it with a clean slate, then I suggest that you don't watch this video. You read the Hobbit first, and then watch this video. So the Hobbit is one of the first book in the Lord of the Rings. I'm going to call it saga, in that it is the prequel to the original trilogy. So there is you have Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King. And before that story comes The Hobbit. And in The Hobbit, we meet Bilbo Baggins, who is a relative of Frodo Baggins, who is the protagonist of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So Bilbo Baggins is a hobbit. He lives in Hobbiton, and he lives in the Shire, and he basically is like most other hobbits. He does what most other hobbits do. He lives in this hole in Bags End, eats breakfasts, 2, 3 breakfasts, and basically do what the hobbits usually do. However, there are members of his family who are known as queer, and they're known as queer because they actually go out on adventures. Now, this is something that hobbits don't do. Hobbits generally stay at home. They're not about adventure. They're more like homebodies. Stay at home, just live your life at home, not going out and having interesting adventures. However, Bilbo has had relatives who have gone off and done this, and when he meets Gandalf at the beginning of the novel, you kind of see this streak in him when he gets a bit excited about some things that Gandalf begins talking about. And you see that he actually is kind of really interested in going on an adventure, though the social norms of his community kind of have constrained that desire in him. In any case, Gandalf, of course, introduces him to 13 dwarves led by Thorin, and I don't remember all their names, but if you can say them all, they all sound like a rhyme. But 13 dwarves led by Thorin, who is the king under the mountain. So basically, their story is that back in the day, a dragon named Smog has come, and he has basically taken their kingdom, the Lonely Mountain. It's basically a mountain where they mine gold, and basically there is where they lived. And this dragon came, kicked them out, and now Thorin wants to go back and retake the mountain. So Gandalf actually co-ops Bilbo and tells him like, "Hey, you're going on this thing as a part of their journey." Bilbo kind of doesn't want to go, but at the end of the day, he decides to get up and he goes and he follows them on their adventures. And basically, they meet trolls, they meet goblins, they meet talking spiders and dragons and all types of stuff in order to get elves in this world and all this stuff to kind of get back to this mountain and reclaim what is rightfully Thorin's, what he feels is rightfully his. So I really like the book. I really like Lord of the Rings. I My first experience with Lord of the Rings was actually watching the movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. At the time, I didn't know what it was. I was young then. I just was watching it, way too young to watch Lord of the Rings, but watched the movie. Really liked the movie, and later found out that it was actually based off books. I think sometime later I read The Hobbit, and then it took me years and years later to actually sit down and read Lord of the Rings itself. But I really like the Lord of the Rings world. I liked all 4 books, and reading The Hobbit was absolutely enjoyable. It was even more enjoyable because I actually read an audiobook, and on as an audiobook I really liked it because there are actually a lot of songs in The Hobbit. The dwarves sing songs, Frodo himself sings a song, the elves sing songs, and when I read it, like I don't really have any idea what the tune is supposed to be or come up with a good tune for the songs itself. So I just kind of read it like poetry. But listening to it as an audiobook and the narrator actually sang each song, it actually added like a lot of depth to to that part of the book, which wasn't. I mean, well, I kind of read it as poetry, but it gave it a lot, brought it a lot more, made it a lot more lively. Like especially because a lot of the songs have a lot of emotion and feeling to them that you only really get, I feel, if they're actually sang. And one of the best parts was actually one of the best songs that I remember was when Bilbo was fighting these spiders and trying to get them away from the rest of the group, and he was singing the song that was taunting the spiders. And the way the narrator sang it and the way it was described, it actually really fit the scene really well. It made brought the scene alive in a way that just reading on the page without a tune um, without the tune would not have the same impact. So it would not have the same impact without the tune as it did hearing the tune, the narrator sing the song. So that was really really good listening to the audiobook. Um, and one thing I found interesting about the Lord of the Rings is Bilbo himself. You know, Bilbo himself, like I said, starts out as like any other hobbit in the Shire. He just stays at home, and when he first starts out his journey, like one of his first thoughts is, "Oh, I didn't bring a handkerchief with me. Oh, I haven't had second breakfasts." And even though food is something that constantly is on his mind because he is a hobbit, and that's generally what hobbits think about. He actually definitely grows over the course of the journey. He turns out from being something that was, something that from he goes from being a hobbit that you think would be a liability on this journey. He goes from being basically a liability because um, in his confrontation with the trolls, he doesn't do as well. However, by the time you get to say like Mirkwood, and he meets the Wood Elves, and the way he performs there and helping his fellow dwarves escape, you basically see a lot of growth in Bilbo. To him going from this hapless hobbit to becoming a guy who can come up with a genius plan to help out his friends in their time of need, and then you really see that growth over the course of the book. Another thing that I found interesting about the book is that in this in the Hobbit, the main character Bilbo is not um, conscious for the main climax of the book, which I think is quite interesting for a main character to do. Usually, you want your main character to be the center of the climatic events that happen in the book, and there are actually two climatic events that Bilbo is present for one, but he is basically not there essentially because he doesn't see any of it happening, and the other one he is away from the scene of action at the time, and it's quite interesting because those are the two big, you can kind of say, culminations of the plot where you have I don't want to spoil anything just in case you haven't really read the book, but there are two instances there I feel where the main character isn't present for the climax of the book, and I find that quite interesting because when I think of a main character, I always think of him as the center of the action. But I think in a way, Bilbo, it kind of shows the fact that while he is part of the action, there are bigger things happening, and it still works. The plot still works. The story I feel still works, even though Bilbo isn't really present for those two big climaxes in my opinion. Um, and But I found that really interesting. Another thing that was really interesting going forward, because I've read Lord of the Rings, so there's one thing that Gandalf says in passing towards the end when because Gandalf is not present for a lot of the journey as well to the Lonely Mountain. He helps them out for a while, but then he disappears at points. And once he shows up again towards the end of the book, and people ask him what he's doing, and Gandalf says, "Oh yeah, I went somewhere and I faced off with this guy, and I faced off with this guy. We got rid of him. It was, and we took care of that." And you don't realize how big of a deal that is until you find out who the identity of that person was, which is not really explained in The Hobbit I think it may be explained in the appendix somewhere, but it's not explained in the book itself. So, but when you find out who it was he goes and banishes, you're like, oh, that's actually a really big plot point. That's not really explained in The Hobbit, and that may be because The Hobbit was written before the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and that J.R. Tolkien was still, fleshing out the story of the world. But once you find out who it is that Gandalf has gone and faced with, along with the rest of the, I believe it's the White Council, then it was a pretty big deal. That's kind of just boiled down to two sentences, and it's just like, yeah, it faced off against this guy, and it's taken care of. And it's like, oh, okay, so that's what you were doing. But it actually plays big ramifications on the story going forward. And in talking about big ramifications for the story, in The Hobbit is introduced the ring. The ring that is the main center point of conflict in the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is in the title, and in The Hobbit, the ring doesn't have the same importance as it does in the Lord of the Rings, and that is because, from what I understand, J.R. Tolkien kind of fleshes out what the ring is later on. So when he's writing the Fellowship of the Ring, he realizes that he has to go back and he has to actually kind of change some things, because in the first edition, I found this out, in the first edition of The Hobbit, the ring, the way that Bilbo acquires the ring, was different in the first edition than it is, well, now, in light of what happens in the Lord of the Rings. So, slight spoiler here. So if you're watching, this is just like spoiler. You can skip ahead. If I can, I'll try to put timestamps below where you can skip past this part. So it's like spoiler here. But not Frodo. Bilbo gets the ring in the editions that we have now. He gets the ring because he finds it, and then he has this riddle game with Gollum, and basically Gollum realizes he has the ring and goes after him. In the first edition, however, Gollum willingly bets the ring as part of the prize for the game. So he says, hey, if we win the riddle game, then I'll give you this ring. And of course, when you realize the power that the ring has, you realize that no one would willingly bet the ring. Maybe besides someone I won't mention his name, but very few characters in the Lord of the Rings universe would ever willingly say, here, have the ring. That was quite an interesting thing that I learned upon reading it this time, doing a little bit more research into Lord of the Rings. Another thing that for me personally, I always thought, in The Hobbit, the Misty Mountains, goblins. So you have the goblins of the Misty Mountains, and they're kind of like the baddies of the book, besides the dragon Smaug. And I always thought of goblins in the Lord of the Rings universe as different than orcs, and I went looking into it, and it seems that orcs and goblins are actually the same thing. Basically, they're the same species in that J.R. Tolkien refers to them as goblins in The Hobbit, but they are actually still orcs. I think they may be a bit smaller than the normal orc, but they're orcs just like the orcs that you see in Lord of the Rings, which I also found interesting because I kind of just thought of goblins as a totally separate, maybe like a subspecies of orc or something, but something different than the orcs that you see in Lord of the Rings. And that could be because I read The Hobbit and saw the movie and saw that, or at least imagined that the orcs in Lord of the Rings were bigger and stronger than the goblins, or I could just be thinking the Uruk-hai and got that mixed up, but I don't know. But that's something that I also found interesting. So but like I said, I really enjoyed The Hobbit. I really enjoyed the journey, reading The Lord of the Rings, reading The Hobbit. The Hobbit itself, it always feels like I've gone on a journey. And very few books have done that for me, where I feel like I've actually gone on a journey with the characters and have actually come back. And it's always sad when I've ended the book, especially when, if you read Lord of the Rings, it's kind of just one big book instead of like three separate ones. It really feels like that you've gone somewhere and you come back after this long story, and it's kind of sad because you're leaving these characters you kind of grown to come and love. That's it for this discussion video. If you read The Hobbit, what did you guys think? Let me know down in the comment sections below. Um, I will be reading this week. So next Sunday, I will be releasing a discussion video on the Fellowship of the Ring. I have already started it, and I'm listening to that also on audiobook. I'll be listening to all of these on audiobooks, and so far it's good. And hopefully by Sunday next week, I'll be done and I can have a video up for you guys. And I'll probably do it the same way I'm doing this one, where I'm not sitting, with in like I usually do in my normal way. But yeah, you can keep a lookout for that. My video for my October TBR is already, I think that's already come up. That should be out already. And I also will be releasing my wrap up for September tomorrow. So yeah, that will be all for that. So if you like this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos from me, you can subscribe. Please subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter at GhostReads28 and also on Goodreads. The link to that is down in the description box below. So guys, as always, keep reading.